Hello everybody. So we looked at different aspects of the project and Android project and so on, and we looked at how to do logging and toasting and so on. So basically now let's look at UI components. So if we look at the resource folder, before we do that, so what's the layout for the main activity? So how do I find out that? You look here at r.layout. You see here in the main activity, there is a function called onCreate. That is the function that is being called by the system when the activity is going to get created. And part of the creation of the activity is to set its view, the layout for it. And here the view indicates that it is r.layout.activity underscore main. Basically, there is a file called the R file, which is the resource file. So r.layout, right? Dot, and then it has the activity. There is an activity main, right? So now if you go to the resource folder, there is a folder called layout also. So r.layout, and then under it there is an activity underscore main. It's exactly the same name as the name of the variable here. So basically this is how you refer to these XML files, right? So now here is the layout file, right? And basically you could see that any of these windows I can close by just clicking on the hide here, right? And then I can show it back again here by clicking on it, right? Now you could see that there is a design window. This is the window where you can actually interact, and then this is more of a blueprint window. I'm not interested in the blueprint window. So if you click here, you can remove the blueprint window, or you can I just want to show the design window. Okay, so that's my design window. Now, if I only want to show the layout or the UI design window or the design part of the UI, I can just double click on the tab here and it will hide the project. Whenever I need the project back, I just click on the project again and it's going to show up. I can click on the project again and it will hide. All right, so this gives me more space to focus on my layout, right? So now I'm looking at my layout. Now, you can also look at attributes. The attributes will give you information about this. So basically, if I click on the component, it will tell me that it has some text. And it could tell me that its type is text view. You see at the top here it says text view, right? You can also look at the code of that layout. That layout is an XML file. So I can click on the code and it shows me the code. And it tells me that there is something called a constrained layout. And then under the constrained layout there is a text view, which is the component that you could see. Actually, you could also show the design on, if you could do code, or you could split it, meaning that you could show the design and the code at the same time. Or if you look at the code, you could also show the layout validation, where it actually compares it to different sizes. We're not going to look at this for the time being, right? So anyhow, so you could see that I could look at the design. So let's focus on the design. And then you can add components. So you could see here, I could search for a component, right, that I need, or I could just drag a component. For example, one of the components is a button. I could just drag the button and drop it here, right? So basically here is a button, right? And you could see that the problem with the button is that it's not laid out anywhere on the screen. You just put it somewhere, and if we run the app, it's not going to show up correctly. So if we run it, you see, you just dropped it on the screen, and there is no button. Why it shows up at the top? Why? Because you didn't tell the design, the layout. It doesn't know where to place that button, right? You didn't tell it. So if you click on the button, you could see it has 4 points or 4 circles. These circles are places where you could bind to other components. Like for example, you have this component. I could say that the button is under this component. Okay, so basically the top of the button is under this component. And then if I run it now, see here, if I run it now, you could see that the button is under the high, right? If I wanted the button to be centered to the screen, I could just drag this icon here, the circle here, and also drag this other anchor here, and you could see now it is going to be centered on the screen. So when you run it again, you will see that the button is centered on the screen. Okay, so basically this layout is called the constraint layout, and we'll look at it in more detail. But at the end of the day, you can add components. So for some of the components, for example, is a button, which is very popular. You can change the text of the button. You could say click me, for example, right? You can do that. Here is the button and it says click me. You can also change the text appearance. I don't want it to be capitalized. I can click on the all caps or not all caps, right here in the attributes, and you click on it. It's now all caps. I click on it again. It's now not all caps. Now when you run it, you'll see it will just show up as click me and so on, right? And when you click on it, it's a button, right? So you have buttons, you have image views. These are images that you can put. You can also have switches. You can have, let's say, for example, I want to enter some text, right? So basically, these are labels. This is called a text view. And if you want to enter some text, it's called an edit text. Edit. Here it is. So you could see here there is a plain text. There is a password one. There is a password. There is an email. So basically, let's go a plain text. I'll drop it off here. And I want this to be on top of the high, so I can go here and say, okay, this circle or this anchor is connected to this anchor, so this puts it at the bottom of it, right? Now, also I want it to be centered to the screen. I can do that, and I can do that also. Now I run it, and you will see that I'll have the text field here. So I can click on it, I can type something and say hello, for example, and so on. So that's how you could set up the layout, right? So basically, it's very simple introduction to layouts. We will have more complicated introductions, or more detailed introductions. But anyhow, you could see that you can add components. You can also change, for example, let's say I want to add a padding between hi and name. So basically, you see here, when you click on hi, you could see that it tells you here the constraint structure of it. You could say that these are connected already, and this one is not connected to anything because this top one is not connected to anything. So I can come here and say I want the padding to be, say, 20, right? And you click on enter, and you could see it went up by 20. So if you click here, see there is a 20 offset between them, right? It's a margin of 20 between them. And you can make it, say, 100, and you'll see what will happen in that case. You can see it goes up a little bit. So now if we run it, you'll see that it's not going to be directly connected to it, right? Now also you could, for example, let's say I want a label at the top, so I can drag a text view, right? And then I want that label to be at the top. I can put it like this, right? Putting it like this, but then I want it to anchor to the top and anchor to the left, right? And then I can also add some paddings, say 16, and another 16. So basically, here we go. You could see that it's going to go down by 16 and go to the right by 16. And you run it, and you can see the UI component text view at the top. So another thing to think about to investigate or to pay attention to is these components have IDs. You see IDs at the top here? These IDs cannot have any spaces. These IDs are going to be translated into variables so that we can retrieve these components in code and manipulate them, or retrieve their values. Like, for example, if somebody enters something in the text field, I want to read the value of the text field, right? So we'll do that in a little bit, right? So basically, let's say this text field, let's say this guy is called text view 1. Let's call it the top text view top. Okay, I could do that, and I pressed enter. So now it changed its ID to text view top. Now this edit text, I want it to be called, for example, this is the ID of it. So I'll call it, for example, edit text, for example, just edit text. I'm just going to call it edit text, for example, let's say entry. All right, here it is. So that's the ID of it. So now I have something called edit text entry, right? And then I have the text view, right? So let's say I want to change the values that get displayed here in both of them, right? So I can go here. There is something called find view. If you are familiar with HTML or in HTML or in JavaScript, very, very primitive JavaScript, is find element by ID. There is where you could use the DOM to retrieve an element by its ID. The same situation here. We could find a view by ID. So for example, I need a text view. All right, so how do I know it's a text view that I need for this guy? Notice because it's called text view. If you look at its code, let's go back to the code. It's called a text view. You see here, it's text view. And the Java classes are exactly the same, right? So if we go back here, text view equals find view by ID, r.id. And then these are all the IDs that you have in the system. And we called it what? Text view top. Remember? We called it text view top. That gives you access to that text view. So if you look here, the design, basically text view, it's a text view, its ID is text view top, right? So now pay attention also to something else, is that we did this after the content view is set up. You cannot do it before, because before the content view is set up, there is no view, there is no actual UIs that are laid up on the screen. right? The view is not actually loaded yet, but I can do it after this line, right? So text view, I got the text view. Now I want to change the text of the text view. I could say text view dot, I could do text view dot set text, and I could say hello world, for example, right? So I can do that. So let me remove all these toasts, which don't need them. So basically I could set the text. I can also get the text. I could say text view dot get text. See, I can get the text. So I can get the text and can set the text. So you can run it. And then when we run it, you will see that it's still building. You see at the bottom here, it's still building. And it seems that I need to restart this device. We'll see, but anyway, here it is. Okay, cool. You could see that it showed up hello world here. The same scenario for the edit text. So this guy is an edit text. How do I know? I go back here. You click here and it says its type is edit text. You see at the top. And at the same time, we called it, the ID we gave it is edit text entry. So basically I could do this. I could say edit text, and this is edit text equals find view by ID r.id dot edit text entry, right? And then I could say text edit text dot set text, and I can set it to whatever I want it to be. Like let's say this is an example, or an example text, right? So that's this. So basically, when I run it, there should be an example text showing up here. So we run it, and you can see that there is an example text set up here, and then there is hello world also set up here, right? I can also change the text of the button, the text of that string. So basically, there is the set or get text if I need the text value. But the most important part to look at today is the find view by ID. Find view by ID enables you to find a view on the screen, but it needs to have an ID. And how do you set up the ID? In the layout here or in the design window, you can click on it and then you can set up its ID, right? So you can set up the ID, and let's say I want to change its ID from top. I want to call it, say for example, heading, right? For example. Now notice what's going to do. I'm changing its ID here. I press enter. And it asks me that update all usage of this text view top as well, of course, because now I have used that variable inside my code. I click on yes. And then what happens is that it's going to change its ID. And at the same time, it did change its ID. It did change the occurrence here, which is very important. Because if you said no, it will change here, but the code will have an error because that variable will not exist anymore. All right, so right now you got a very quick introduction on the layout, so the components that you can lay on the screen. We give you an idea of the constraint layout, which is very interesting, and we will discuss it in more detail. But you also got to see or to use find view by ID, which is very important. Please let me know if you have any questions.